I'm offering today a selection of translations I made from the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke. Maybe you can guess that he wrote in the German language. My translations are very faithful. What I do is I keep the rhythm pattern. I have to have that beat. I'm very faithful to that, and on top of that, I try to preserve the rhyme patterns intact. Also, all the vowel harmonies and consonant harmonies. That means if in a given stanza, if a consonant or vowel appears once, it will appear twice, so that we'll have concord and not an anomaly. Now, the name of this book is Rilke's Art of Metric Melody, Form-Faithful Translations, that I just explained, with dialogic verse replies. Now, that's the interesting thing that is really unprecedented in Rilke translation, and maybe in translation books generally. I seem to be the virtual inventor of the genre of literary dialogue translation books in verse. What I do is, for every poem that he wrote, I write one. And I usually try to use the form that he just has taught me. That's the way it works. So we can begin with poem number 1, and I've chosen it for special appeal to people in the Triple Cities area where I live and where my friends here live. It's the carousel capital, perhaps, of, or the number 1 carousel region of all the regions in the United States, because the philanthropist George F. Johnson left 6 carousels to us in a quite small Susquehanna Valley area, free to children in perpetuity. Another interesting thing about this poem, The Carousel, is that evidently J.D. Salinger read it, and he used it in the last 2 pages of Catcher in the Rye, where you may remember Phoebe with her blue coat, that's taken from the poem, and the red hat, which I think she's just borrowed. I think it's Holden's hunting hat. She's got these 2 nice bright colors, things together, and she goes round and round on the Central Park carousel. So you may know this poem secondhand, so to speak, if you've never actually heard it in German or English. Here we go, The Carousel, subtitled Jardin du Luxembourg. In other words, he's in a Parisian park. Well sheltered, shadow-making, turns around a little while the carousel at hand, with colored horses hailing from the land that waits and wavers, then no more is found. The steeds at times may hitched to wagons be, and all equipped with hardened mood of ease. An angry carmine lion goes with these. From time to time white elephant we see. A stag is there, as on the forest ground, but he a saddle bears, and there espied a small blue girl with belt is buckled round. And on the lion white a youth will ride, and hold him heated little hand has he. The teeth and lion tongue will never hide. From time to time white elephant we see. And on their horses they are sweeping past, the girls included, bright, who leaping steed have pretty near outgrown with swinging speed. Up, down they look, and straight ahead at last. From time to time white elephant we see. They whirl around and hurry till the end. They circle and they turn without an aim. A red, a green, a gray, they gleaming send. An outline gone before you find the name. At times a little smile you'd like to claim. A blissful dazzle spent upon the game that breathless blind duration may extend. How am I going to reply with that? Listen. Ineffably, I love the carousel. We've 6 of them right here in Triple Cities. I'll reminisce tonight, and little ditties indite of childhood wonder, thus to tell in fantasy more than Thurber's Walter Mitty's, overflowing with its manic spell. Historic they were made by Alan Herschel and George F. Johnson, hero of commercial and philanthropic charity as well, presented them as gifts with the condition that they be free to children. Ring the bell! I cannot well contain my ebullition for Johnson and his fond, non-controversial fulfillment of a lifetime giving mission, nor memories of child excitement quell an early world in carefree light arrayed. I used to bring my daughter. We'd go riding on rising horse or falling, mind be gliding along with the calliope that played. I loved the up and down plus surrounding motion. I felt transported more than she, I tell you. In happy trance, enchanting, rapt devotion, the music and the movement would impel you. I liked to think of boats upon the ocean, the air itself a more than potent potion. Oh, what a spell of melody befell you. You notice in both of our poems, we're very musical, rhymes and more rhymes, and he's quite acrobatic about it. He's a virtuoso player, almost as if he was showing up how many rhymes he can get in. I'm enjoying the happy mood, and I like the motion, so my next poem will be the one that happens to follow it in the book. It's called The Spanish Dancing Girl. Rilke traveled a lot, and he visited Spain. I never went to Spain, but I saw a movie of flamenco dancing with my daughter in a Manhattan theater, and so that'll be my reply. The Spanish Dancing Girl. As in the hand the sulphur match of white, prior to flame arising every way, will stretch out tongues of fire, a circle bright of new observers see the heated light of widened rounding dance in twitching play. Now flame and nothing more, behold it there. With but a glance will she enkindle hair and spin with daring, artful, suddenly, her garment all in ardent ecstasy. From her, like serpents that in terror rise, bare arms with clicking, liven ears and eyes. And then, as though of fire she'd had enough, she gathers it and throws it, gesture rough, commanding with the pride of what to birth has come. She views it raging on the earth, the flame unyielding still in lowly place, but sure, triumphant, and with what a sweet and greeting smile, she's lifting up her face and firmly stamps it out with little feet. The most remarkable thing about that poem to me is seemingly it was all about fire, but there's no fire there. That was all used to describe the dancer. Very clever little things. He does that all the time. Here's my reply. My replies never have names. That's the homage that I pay. I don't give myself an independent title. I just set it up as a tribute to the person who taught me the form. A film flamenco we had come to see, where never would we hear a spoken word included. Let but gesture, singing be. So hoarse and worn the vocal tones that we, the like of them before, had never heard. And wild, impassioned, with a bitter bliss. My daughter had a theory for this. Not only ardor throats had plundered so, but smoking decades made the trouble grow. Their fervor made it plain, however, fate will make me prove the limits of my state. The drama was but virtual, no plot, no situation even. That was not an obstacle to knowledge. In the eye, the heaven was the hell of nether sky. The clouds were hungry, swagging on the deep, each arabesque of robe a white whale wave, that moonlight would with furor lightning lave. Then let us rage before the reign of sleep. That just came to me suddenly at the end. Well, those are from the middle of the book, but I'd like to start now with the very first poem in the book, because I'd like to show you, maybe to a degree, how Rilke started and how he advanced. He begins with his poem called Early Apollo. This is the god Apollo as he may have been, as he may have felt and looked in his early teens. His career as the god of the lyre and as the god of the sun and also of thunder. He has many purposes. The gods have their good and terrifying sides. Early Apollo seems to be the god blended with a portrait of the poet himself, who is also starting out his career. These two books here called New Poems, Parts 1 and 2, that I'm reading from, and they were issued in 1907 and 1908, and they were his first two big breakthrough books. In my reply, I will have a little bit of a contrast. I'll depict another Greek god very different from Apollo. I like Mercury, or Hermes. He's the boy god. He's a prankish god. He's a bit of a thief. He pulls pranks and he does jokes, and he has very wide interests, like a hyperactive child. He can't stay at one thing at a time. So what he did one day, he spotted a seashell, and he strung it with guts and thereby invented the lyre and handed it to Apollo. We don't know if Hermes even ever bothered to play it. So two very different kinds of personalities. Early Apollo. Through twigs, how often, yet ungarlanded with leafage, dawn appears. For him 'twould seem that spring is here, and so within his head no obstacle would yet prevent the gleam of lyrics that might nearly strike one dead. But in his look no shadow met the eyes. Too cool for bay, the temples, we'd have said, and only later will the brow arise with garden long-stemmed roses fine to see, from which the single leaves when they shall fall about the trembling mouth will driven be, that yet is silent and untried and shines, and only with his smile it drinks, divines a singing flowing in, awaiting all. Reply. As Adam dreamed of Eve in Milton lines, may we surmise the growing God when young might smiling prophesy the high designs kind fate may hold in store? That silent tongue will Hermes liven when a shell upflung by ocean to the shore he redefines. When it with sinews tight is newly strung, behold the lyre. The boy his columbines and asphodel and amaranth entwines in idle play, but when will he have sung to harmony of harp? We find no signs he ever tried, still rummaging among some floral toys. Each moment he enshrines. O lucky youth, to whom no duties clung. Well, for my next poem, it's a little quieter. We have a young woman's lament. And this is quite interesting. I don't get to represent this as fully as I'd like. But Rilke, more than any poet I know, writes about women. He likes to write about women of all ages and get inside their thoughts and feelings. And this is a young woman's lament. How we liked alone to be. When we still were children, we found it mild, the solitude. Some in struggle must abide, others may remain aside, staying near or straying wide, path and pet and picture mood. Then I thought, life cannot cease, lending solitude release. By ourselves are we beguiled. Isn't inner life the best? Is it not the comfort test, comprehending as a child? I've rejected been of late. Now to burden overgreat my reclusive life has grown, while upon my swelling breast feeling stands at wing behest, and for flight or end I moan. She's growing up in a hurry. In my reply, I simply like to deal with the transition problem as an older person sees it. Caterpillar on a leaf can recall your mother's grief. So the thought of William Blake. But the child must mourn as well, half rejoicing in the spell that portends a major break. Biologic hormone growth means that we are nothing loath, prospects new in life to try. Trial by ordeal indeed, though it be, occasion heed, lest your fate should pass you by. Liminals in later age are a harder thing to gauge. What is butterfly in me? Part his gift, and part my will, living mission to fulfill. Swinging on a leaf, I see. Now we have, and by the way, I'll just hold up the book to show you how closely I imitate the form. They look almost exactly the same. That will happen throughout the book, I promise. This is a most remarkable poem. It's very short, but I think it's very effective. It's called Irana to Sappho. In other words, two representative ancient Greek girls, except that one of them is a little bit special, if we can trust the name. Sappho happens to be the name of the greatest woman poet of ancient Greece. In fact, the earliest woman poet in human history, so far as we know, whose name we can attach to her work. Sappho wrote a vast amount of poetry, and she was the most revered woman poet in ancient Greece, but barely a pamphlet of her work survives today. It's really a terrible thing to think about. But she never stops inspiring people, and I've read an entire book of poems written, ascribed to Sappho, fantasized Sapphos of every sort. So here's Irana thinking about her recent meeting with this marvelous girl. Oh, you wild, wide-ranging thrower girl! Like a spear, one more still thing, mid my kin I lay, but one who'd sing threw me far. Where am I? Head a whirl. Me can no one homeward bring. Sisters think of me, weave warp and weft. Well-known treadings fill a house at rest. I alone am distant, I have left. All a tremble, mere request. For the goddess here, the loveliest, leads my life, myth-glowing she, the blessed. That's quite a friendship. In my reply, I simply wrote about myself. I can have visions too. This is relative to nothing in particular except how I felt on a given day. Thunder of the trumpets of the night came to me on steed of God, pounding unabated dream-hard sod. One who, bringing bliss in part affright, prophesied of dawning awed. Then I saw the water where the sun, nets invented, made of liquid ray, wove in heart what dark had but begun. Now to throw me woken into day, purpose brave, euterpal to portray. Be horizon light, arise and run. I'd like you to take a deep breath now and then. I get worked up over these poems sometimes. Those were two of the shortest in the book, and yet they take the most out of you. Now, the next poem is really strange. I'm going to keep saying that over and over, I'm afraid, because he's a strange poet and he does many strange things. One of them is that he loves the Bible, but what he loves about the Bible is, number one, stories you probably haven't heard. He likes the out-of-the-way stories, not often, for whatever reason, not often told. And then he also likes, as we'll see later, to combine one or more Bible characters in a new person of his own synthetic figuration. This one is a story that does appear in the Bible. It's about Abishag, or Avishag. This is a young woman who was sent to visit King David. King David at the time was aging. He had all kinds of aches and pains. He could hardly move. He was feeling tired always. And she was sent to him to liven him up. The Bible says she lay beside him, but in Rilke, she lies right on top of him. The aim was to reinvigorate David's manhood, because this is the time, you remember, when people believed that the fertility of the king was directly related to the fertility of the land that he ruled. So she is sent to him to warm him up, so to speak, and what Rilke does is in the first half of the poem, he shows us how she felt while she is lying there on top of him, and in the second part, how he felt the day after. She lay, her child arms placed by servants were, to clasp the aged fading one around, on whom she lay, the long sweet hours bound, worried that he so aged might demur. And she would turn her face within his beard, at times when suddenly an owl would cry, and all that was the night, and that she feared and longed for, would assemble standing by. The stars kept trembling, even as she would do. The breeze went seeking through the sleeping room. The curtain stirred, a sign one might pursue. Her gaze would trace it back into the gloom. Yet clung she, holding to the dark one old, and unaffected by the chosen night, lay on his princely majesty, so cold, in virgin wise, and with her spirit light. The monarch sat, reviewed the empty day of deeds he'd done, how unfelt pleasures weigh. A dog, pet cherished in a loving way. But Abishag at evening yet would stay, above him curved. His muddled life it lay, abandoned as the coast's dire peril test, below the star frame of her quiet breast. And he at times, who women well apprised, beneath his bending eyebrows recognized the moveless mouth of kiss incapable. He saw her feelings withe, did not extend its green to meet his depth of longing full. That chilled him. Like a harking hound, he'd lend his thought to seeking self, blood's final pull. It's nice to have your Bible stories renovated for you, isn't it? Now, this next one is also a Bible story. Now, I'll pause a minute to talk about that carefully, because I think this is not only Rilke's favorite Bible story, but the closest to his own heart. And that's why it's his favorite. It's the story of the prodigal son. You're familiar with this? The prodigal, it means a squanderer. He squandered his father's wealth. He wasted it. Pretty soon it was nearly gone. He felt he had to leave home. In shame and disgrace, that's what he did. Then in the city he proceeded, as one sometimes can do in the city, to become one of the more miserable of the homeless, one of the more poverty-stricken. And in fear of starvation, he went right back home to face whatever came, whether it was a rebuke or physical punishment. And instead of that, he got an embrace and a banquet. Now, Rilke was asked why the prodigal son had to leave home and whether that was the only reason, the wasting of the money. And he said no. He said, I think he had to leave because he was too much loved. Can you turn the watch away? Excuse me. It reflects in my eyes. So here then is the departure of the lost son, as Rilke sees it. To leave now all bewildered making things that, though our own, to us do not belong. That, like the water in the ancient springs, lend shaken mirror, get our image wrong. From all of this that stubbornly yet clings like thorns to fare into the distance dim. And this and him, whom no one more could see, so daily they'd become habitual, gently to view of reconcilement full, as if beginning and quite near to be, and getting hints of how impersonal the woe was, over all and constantly. The sorrow childhood bonds had loaded, and to leave again, unloosing then one's hand, as if in new healed wound more salt were thrown, and travel on. But where? To what's unknown, far to an unrelated, warmer land? Behind all action, grey coulisse wing, grown indifferent, whether garden or a wall, and then go on. And why? Urge, inclination, or stubbornness, or dark-hued expectation? To take this on yourself, in vain perhaps to let what you had held fall by, and die alone, not comprehending why? Is that the way? New life in time to gain? You can see perhaps why when a friend of his wrote Rilke a letter saying he was despairing of ever finding happiness in life, Rilke replied saying, why do you think that should be your goal, finding happiness in life? I think it should be rather to experience things, to experience as much as you can, and if possible, to experience what no one ever experienced before you. And if that's a new kind of sadness, well, that's not worth rejecting. Well, here's my reply. It's a little more cheerful. I have to say that I'm not so, I could never have come up with this interpretation of the poem that he left because he was too much loved, or that your destiny might be to be more melancholy than anyone, or in a new way that no one ever was before you. I have happy brain chemicals. So in my reply, it's a little different. I try to remember that, yes, the sunset is bloody red, but the same red comes in the morning, and we don't think of it as anybody's blood being shed. It is rather a glorious sign of new life, and fire rising something like a phoenix, as a phoenix bird might rise reddened from the flames. Here then is my answer. You'll have to get the strength to be a son. The red in blood scrim on the hem portrays Adonis gone whenever day is done, and so the human fateful hue displays. Don't claim the race we run dismays, for what we're prophesied to lack is coming back and filling vein and artery, the heart intensing, then relaxing, tells the brain the way of alternation so to gain. The spring, the flood of measured time and art. The hardest part, to sacrifice applause, which not for naught will rhyme with laws. nor let the mind be caught in others' fear that would the God constrain. They'd crudely soothe a crucifixion pain. Too hot the warming warms. Till yonder dust come nigh, keep well alive the wanderlust. Benumbing comfort is a greater strain. We ponder must the way to keep astir, for loss and gain to singer are the burden, the refrain. Of nothing bear the brunt. We beckett bold, the wreck it holds confront. Recall the God who daily dies, and so the heaven both defies and deifies. Well, that's as much me as Rilke's prodigal son was Rilke. Now, in this next poem, we get back to the Bible idea. The title is Pietà. You recognize that word? That's the name, the Italian name of the famous sculpture that Michelangelo made of Mary holding Jesus. So, Jesus, here again I see your feet, the feet of one so youthful then, and bare when I'd undressed them, washed them tenderly. They stood all tangled in my outspread hair. White deer in thorn bush they appeared to me. Your limbs, the never loved, I see them sweet within this night of love that we would greet. We never down together lay, no more to do, but now be wakeful and adore. Your hands, beloved, see them, they are torn by wounds that from no bite of mine were born. Your heart is open, one may enter in, though mine alone the entry might have been. Now you are wearied, and your lips desire, no more can feel for mine that ache entire. Oh, Jesus, when was it our time? Now far, we both in wondrous way quite ruined are. Now you notice, first we have Mary washing his feet, but then she seems to turn into Mary Magdalene. And that's a bit of a problem. You know, Mary was a sex worker until midlife when she converted and became a saint. The whole thing becomes quite complicated. And so I try to put it in a context in my reply. And I also call attention in the reply to the fact that there is a Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which was written about 2,000 years ago, and attempts were made to keep it secret, and it was just in the last few years recovered in the most dreadful state. It wasn't recovered in a terrible state, but it soon acquired that state from being transferred from one person to another. But there's enough of it to make out what the plot is, and there's enough of it to make out who the characters are. And Mary Magdalene rejoices that she was chosen to be the first one to see Jesus Christ after he had escaped from death. And St. Peter thinks that she has a terrible ego problem. He can't stand the idea that a woman should be so uppity. That's in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. If you haven't heard this before, there's a good reason. The Mary who had washed the leader's feet, and Mary Magdalene who'd been the first to see him when the bonds of death he'd burst, devoted servants both, a guerdon meet, had well received when those no more immersed in social doctrines of the time of Paul that asked the women not to speak at all in church, but live beneath obedience, the prohibition ended. Were less tense. Of Magdalene a gospel one composed, for centuries it languished undisclosed, that Christ of her a spirit comrade made, so high in rank St. Peter had dismayed. The Gnostic often lent a higher place to women prophets than the Orthodox had done, like Peter fearing losing face. But time moves on, and heaven gate unlocks. Now, in the next poem, I think I'll just, it's very odd. I've said that before, and I said I'd say it again. It's very odd. You may remember that the Spanish dancer seemed to be all about fire, but there was no fire there. It was all a way to describe how Rilke felt when he looked at the Spanish dancer and how she may have been feeling to make that effect occur. Now, here too, there's a bit of a mystery. A rose window is a very fancy, highly colored window high up in a church, in a cathedral. Rose window. Within, there pause with slow and lazy tread, create a quiet made bewildering. And then one cat, how suddenly is led upon the other wandering cat to fling a powerful glance. Great eye will take it in, that glance which from a whirlpool center grows, controlled, and but a little while will swim, and then sink down, of world no more it knows. And yet the eye, that seemed to rest and nod, now opens, blinking, and in frenzy glows, and rips, red-blooded, deep into the foe. From a cathedral's darkness being, so will grip the heart an ample window rose, and violently rip it into God. All right, now, we've been looking at cats. There are no cats in the rose window. The bright colors that seem to be in combat with each other brought on the vision of the fighting cats. And in the end, that is what allows the poet to compare the extreme dramatic vividness of the window with the experience of being violently ripped into God. Here's my reply. We heard of love bites on the Christ. Now learn of cat fights in the rose. By vivid images enticed, the poet is, the passion glows. With dissonance a highly spiced aroma, pungent savor goes. They well convey the work of Geist by what the God-seized body knows. Sense pleasure will the singer heist from what the anchorite deemed foes, that far from temple porticos appeared to live. But love, it sows within the heart what light sufficed for grand Damascus overthrows. Now, I turn to the Panther. The Panther is one of the shortest poems Rilke has written. It's a dozen lines long, and it has become one of the most famous. All it does is describe a panther in the zoo. And the subtitle is, In the Botanic Garden, Paris. His look has, by the passing of the bars, become so weary it can hold no more. A seeming thousand of them, constant jars to mind. Behind them, there's no world in store. The walk, so gentle, flexible, and strong, small roundings making, daily littler still, is like a dance of power overlong around a mighty, though a deafened will. Eye pupil's curtain will at times be viewed in quiet raised. A picture suddenly will enter limbs extended quietude, and in the heart will cease to be. Now, that was written over 100 years before the current climate of opinion that has been considerably intensified regarding the state of animals, how we treat animals, whether there should be such a thing as a zoo, and if so, what that zoo should be like, so that animals might preserve a bit of sanity in it. Interesting, isn't it? It's still, to this day, hard for me, or might be hard for anyone, to read this poem and then take a trip to the zoo right afterward. In my reply, I couldn't think of anything like it, but I could think immediately of another panther poem. I love to read poetry, and I read it in several languages, and so I translated a poem called The Panther by a Russian poet, and actually written at just about the same time, within a decade maybe, of Rilke's composition of The Panther. This is by Konstantin Dmitrievich Balmont. Balmont, you can just pronounce it Balmont. It isn't a Russian name anyway, it came from French, but although the poet knew that perfectly well, he hated the French and he wouldn't admit that he had a French-derived name. He's one of my very favorite poets, and he has presented here his own portrait of the panther. Well made and motley, laggard, hot when sated, 3 days he'll sleep, and afterward, awaking, will have a hounding premonition, aching the call to hunt. He's growling, agitated, the tail a-swinging, lazily he goes. The fur is dappled, and a golden sheen will glimmer. Someone noted once the keen, fine eyes, a candle that uncanny glows. The pleasant smell of him the air can fill. The muezzin on the steep of Georgian hill, the panther hymned, who warmest love had won. As aloe, thickly fragrant, swelled the song. Snow leopard singer, he had known him long, with bloody dusk inflamed, unsettling sun. You notice that's a little bit of wordplay there with unsetting sun. He's always alive in the poet's mind. And the reason he's so much alive in Balmont's mind is that Balmont was the translator of Georgia. You know, the Republic of Georgia used to be in the Soviet Union. It's really quite an oriental place. I spent a day and a half there and noticed the palm trees on Main Street. It's just like walking down a street in Tampa, Florida. And the interesting thing is that Georgia is a Christian country. It has one of the oldest of Christian churches in it, but it's surrounded by Muslim countries. So in the greatest work of Georgian literature, which happens to be called The Bearer of the Panther Skin, or The Wearer of the Panther Skin, sometimes just called the Panther Skin Hero, the poem it contains an episode where the hero is put into a state of gloom and despair because his lady friend has just been abducted, and he actually faints. And to arouse him, the mullah comes into the room and reads from the Quran, and that does it. And this is right in the middle of a Christian country's greatest epic, because it's just really a very multicultural and multi-faith society. What brought that? You see, one thing brings another into mind. That's one of the joys. Free association was Freud's pleasure, and also that of the poet. I think I'm going to end with a poem that I wrote on a related theme. I haven't experienced any panthers, but there's my daughter's neighbor's pet cat. That belongs to the same family. So here's something called Ella the Cat. Reclining on her back in playful style, near napping she is flirting, face half hid, behind an auburn pillow where are thrid lines white and black, together to beguile the viewer with her brindled fur, where these three color friends a tapestry have made in tufted weave, or say a serenade. Hind feet Heart raised in hair, the shadows tease in dialogue with darker patches. Chin and cheeks and forepaws lit in snowy tone, the landscape of the form has emblem grown. Coquettish pet, sly bliss within. Thank you.